In 1982, John Carpenter released what critics called degenerate trash, a movie so disturbing that crew members vomited watching it being made. The thing bombed so hard it nearly ended Carpenter's career forever. But here's the twist. It's now considered one of the greatest horror films ever created. How did a film using 50 gallons of fake blood, real animal organs, and a 22-year-old monster maker become a masterpiece? Today, we're diving into 20 facts about the thing that prove sometimes the greatest art comes from the darkest places. Number 1. The most iconic moments in horror. Every horror fan remembers that moment. MacReady heating a piece of wire, blood samples in petri dishes, the sudden, violent explosion of alien life jumping from the dish. It's burned into cinema history. But here's what makes it incredible. There was no CGI safety net in 1982, no digital enhancement, no computer-generated leaps. Special effects artist Rob Bottin created real prosthetic blood that could actually jump on cue. The team used heated wire beneath the dishes to make the fake blood react violently at the perfect moment. They rehearsed the timing dozens of times because they essentially had one shot to get it right. The actors' reactions? Mostly genuine. Kurt Russell knew something would happen, but the supporting cast were kept partially in the dark about the exact timing. Their shock was real. Their fear was real. And that authenticity translated directly onto the screen, creating one of the most suspenseful sequences in horror history. And that was just the beginning of the practical effects nightmares waiting on this production. Number 2. The movie was released the same day as E.T. June 25th, 1982. Universal Studios made a decision that would haunt John Carpenter for years. They released The Thing on the exact same day as Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Imagine the contrast. In one theater, families watched a lovable alien help a boy fly a bicycle across the moon. In the next theater, audiences watched a creature rip itself out of a dog's body in a spray of blood and tentacles. Guess which one families chose? E.T. became the highest-grossing film of 1982, eventually making over $792 million worldwide. The Thing? It made just $19 million against a $15 million budget. Barely profitable. In Hollywood terms, that's a disaster. Number 3. The dog actor freaked out the crew. His name was Jed, half wolf, half dog, and according to everyone on set, he was unnaturally perfect for the role of the infected alien dog. Jed didn't just walk through the American Research Station, he glided, silently, with an intelligence that felt wrong for an animal. The crew started calling him the evil dog because his movements were so calculated and predatory. He would stare at actors without blinking. He would time his entrances perfectly. He seemed to understand the scene better than some of the humans. Director John Carpenter was thrilled. The other actors? Legitimately unsettled. Keith David later admitted that working with Jed felt like working with something that was studying you. The dog's performance was so effective that several crew members joked he might actually be infected with an alien organism. The opening sequence where Jed Thing walks through the base, observed by the paranoid Americans, that slow burn tension works because Jed's performance is genuinely unnerving. He moves like something pretending to be a dog, which, in the story, is exactly what he is. And Jed's subtle horror was nothing compared to what Rob Bottin was building behind the scenes. Number 4. Rob Bottin was only 22 when he created the monsters. 22 years old. Most people that age are finishing college or working entry-level jobs. Rob Bottin was creating some of the most disturbing practical effects in cinema history. John Carpenter hired Bottin after seeing his work on The Howling, but nobody expected what he would deliver. Bottin didn't just design monsters, he engineered biological nightmares. The spider head, the stomach mouth, the complete cellular transformations. Each creature represented weeks of sculpting, mechanics, and problem-solving. The workload became crushing. Bottin assembled a team, but he personally oversaw every detail. He worked 7 days a week, often through the night, for over a year. The pressure was immense. This was his chance to prove he belonged among the legends. And then his body gave out. Near the end of production, Bottin collapsed from exhaustion and was hospitalized for several weeks. He was literally working himself to death to finish the film. When he couldn't complete the final monster, the Blair Thing, Carpenter had to bring in another legend, Stan Winston, to finish the job. Bottin was 22 when filming ended. He looked 40. His dedication created cinema history, but it nearly destroyed him in the process. and the monsters he created required some truly insane practical materials. Number 5. One scene required 50 gallons of slime and blood. The defibrillator scene. Dr. Copper trying to revive Norris, the chest suddenly opening like a mouth. Arms pulled inside, blood everywhere. It's one of the most shocking moments in horror history. What you don't see on screen, the absolute chaos it took to film it. The effects team filled the prosthetic chest cavity with 50 gallons of fake blood, slime, and organic-looking fluids. When the mechanism triggered, all 50 gallons sprayed across the set simultaneously. The actors were drenched. The cameras were splattered, and most critically, the floor became an ice rink of slippery fluids. Crew members were literally slipping and falling between takes. The set had to be cleaned and redressed multiple times because the blood kept spreading into areas it wasn't supposed to reach. Richard Dysart, playing Dr. Copper, wore protective gear under his costume, but his face was fully exposed. When the chest mouth snapped, fake blood hit him directly in the eyes. His screams of horror, about 50% acting, 50% genuine shock at having his vision obscured by thick stage blood. They shot that sequence over 2 days. By the end, everyone on set was covered in sticky residue. The scene runs about 30 seconds in the final film. It took 48 hours of misery to create those 30 seconds of terror, and the methods they used got even more extreme. Number 6. The chest chomp actor was a double with no arms. That same defibrillator scene required one more disturbing trick. When Norris's chest bites off Dr. Copper's arms, you're watching something disturbingly realistic. There's a reason for that. The production hired a real double amputee to play the role. They fitted him with a latex prosthetic mask of actor Charles Hallahan's face, positioned him inside the rigged table, and had him wear a costume that concealed where his arms would normally be. When the chest mouth bit down, he pulled his torso back, creating the illusion that the arms were being dragged into the body cavity. It sounds simple, but the result was devastatingly effective. The movement looked authentic because the physics were authentic. A person with no arms was genuinely pulling back into that prosthetic torso, creating realistic weight and motion. This was practical effects at its most creative and controversial. Today, this would all be CGI. In 1982, they hired someone whose real physical difference became part of the horror. It's one of those filmmaking decisions that walks an ethical line, but created something impossibly real on screen. Number 7. The Norwegian camp was actually the American camp. Here's a brilliant piece of economical filmmaking. Early in The Thing, the Americans helicopter to the destroyed Norwegian research station. They find burned buildings, frozen bodies, and evidence of chaos. It looks completely different from their own base, except it wasn't. Production designer John J. Lloyd had the crew film all the American base scenes first. Then, once they were done with that location, they literally burned it down, destroyed it, and reused the wreckage to create the Norwegian station. They added some different set dressing, rearranged the debris, and filmed the discovery scenes. It saved the production thousands of dollars and solved a major logistical problem. Finding 2 Arctic research stations in filming locations was nearly impossible, so they made one location do double duty. The Norwegian camp scenes were filmed in the actual charred remains of the American set. When the actors walk through that destruction, they're walking through the same buildings they'd been working in weeks earlier. It added an eerie meta layer to the production. The cast was literally exploring the ruins of their own movie set. Number 8. The movie offers no confirmation of who's infected. One of the most debated aspects of The Thing is the question, who's infected and when? Fans have spent 40 years analyzing every scene, every breath, every glance, trying to determine the timeline of infection. Here's the secret. John Carpenter intentionally never told the cast members whether their characters were the Thing. Not even Kurt Russell knew for certain if MacReady was infected at the end. Carpenter wanted genuine uncertainty in the performances. He wanted real paranoia. This created a fascinating dynamic on set. Actors would ask Carpenter directly, "Am I the Thing? Is my character infected?" And Carpenter would refuse to answer. He'd just smile and say, "Play it however you want." This drove the cast crazy, but it worked. Number 9. Kurt Russell nearly blew himself up filming an explosion. Kurt Russell's MacReady is the film's tough, no-nonsense hero. He faces down monsters with flamethrowers and dynamite, never backing down, and Russell committed to doing many of his own stunts, which almost killed him. During the sequence where MacReady throws dynamite to destroy an infected section of the base, an explosion went off with more force than expected. The blast sent debris flying in all directions, including directly toward Russell. A piece of burning material came within feet of hitting him in the face. Russell, being Russell, barely flinched. He finished the take, but when Carpenter yelled "cut," the crew rushed over to check if he was injured. He was fine, but only by pure luck. A few feet closer, and the film would have lost its lead actor midway through production. This wasn't the only close call with explosions. The Thing featured extensive pyrotechnics, all practical, all dangerous. Modern productions would have CGI enhancements and safety coordinators monitoring every frame. In 1982, they just lit things on fire and hoped nobody died. Number 10. The sound of the creature was made from animals in distress. Close your eyes and remember the Thing's roar. That wet, screaming, multi-layered horror sound. It doesn't sound like any animal you've ever heard. That's because it's all of them combined. Sound designer Alan Howarth created the creature's vocalizations by layering recordings of whales, lions, pigs, and other animals in distress. Then he distorted them, reversed them, pitched them down, and combined them with recordings of metal scraping against metal. The result was something that sounded biological, but completely wrong. Here's the disturbing part. To get authentic animal distress sounds, they sometimes used recordings of animals genuinely frightened or hurt. These were usually archival recordings from veterinary procedures or wildlife capture operations, not animals harmed specifically for the film, but the sounds were real. Number 11. Carpenter used flamethrowers with real fire. Every flamethrower scene in The Thing used actual military-grade flamethrowers shooting real fire. There were no digital flames, no safe practical effects augmented later. Just actors in protective gear, holding weapons that could genuinely kill them, shooting real fire in enclosed spaces. The actors wore a protective gel on their skin and fire-resistant clothing, but those protections only worked to a point. The heat was extreme. Several near accidents occurred where flames got too close or lasted too long. Actors had their clothing singed. Crew members suffered minor burns. Kurt Russell, ever the professional, learned to operate the flamethrower properly and did most of his own fire stunts. But even he admitted later that every take with fire was genuinely scary. When you watch MacReady torch the creatures, Russell's intensity is partially adrenaline from knowing he's wielding a real weapon that could easily go wrong. Number 12. The score was too minimal. Carpenter added more. John Carpenter hired legendary composer Ennio Morricone to create The Thing's score. Morricone had composed hundreds of iconic film soundtracks, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. This should have been a perfect match, but Morricone's approach was minimalist, eerie, sparse. He delivered simple, haunting tracks with long stretches of near silence. It was brilliant in isolation, but Carpenter felt certain scenes needed more drive, more tension. So Carpenter did something unusual. He composed additional synthesizer music himself to supplement Morricone's score. Carpenter was already an accomplished composer, having scored Halloween and several other films. He understood the pacing his film needed. The final score is a hybrid. Morricone's haunting strings and bass tones set the atmosphere. Carpenter's pulsing synthesizer tracks drive the action sequences. Together, they create something unique. A classical electronic fusion that feels both timeless and distinctly 80s. And Morricone was nominated for a Razzie Award for his work, which remains one of the most baffling nominations in awards history. His score is now considered a masterpiece, but the production's practical effects choices got even more extreme. Number 13. The autopsy scene used real animal organs. When the team examines the burned Norwegian Thing, they're dissecting something that looks disturbingly organic. Because it was. The prop contained actual cow and sheep organs purchased from a butcher and incorporated into the prosthetic. The logic was simple. If you want something to look like real flesh, use real flesh. The organs provided authentic texture, weight, and appearance that even the best prosthetics of 1982 couldn't quite match. When the actors cut into the creature, they were genuinely cutting through biological tissue. This created an olfactory nightmare. Real organs, even fresh ones, smell terrible under hot film lights. The set reeked of decay and blood. Actors had to breathe through their mouths to avoid gagging. Crew members stayed as far away as possible between takes. But on screen, it worked. The autopsy scene has a visceral authenticity that's hard to replicate. When modern viewers feel their stomachs turn, watching that sequence, they're responding to something genuinely organic captured on film, and the commitment to physical realism extended to the entire set environment. Number 14. The movie had one of the coldest sets in Hollywood history. To make the breath visible and the cold palpable, the production refrigerated entire sound stages to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius. Actors worked in these conditions for weeks. Imagine performing intense scenes while literally shivering from cold. The visible breath in every interior scene, that's real. The actors' discomfort and exhaustion, also real. Nobody was acting cold, they were genuinely freezing for most of the production. This created authentic performances, but miserable working conditions. Actors would huddle near space heaters between takes. Hot coffee was constantly available. Some performers wore thermal underwear beneath their costumes. The crew rotated through the cold stages to avoid anyone getting too uncomfortable for too long. The physical environment directly influenced the performances. When you see exhaustion and strain in the actors' faces, you're seeing people who were genuinely cold, genuinely tired, genuinely pushed to their limits. The method worked, but at the cost of everyone's comfort. Number 15. The studio hated the ending and wanted MacReady saved. The final scene. MacReady and Child sitting in the snow, sharing a bottle, waiting to freeze or die. No rescue, no confirmation of who survived or who's infected. Just ambiguous doom. Universal Studios executives hated it. They pushed hard for a traditional Hollywood ending where MacReady survives, gets rescued, and the threat is definitively eliminated. They wanted closure. They wanted hope. They wanted something marketable. John Carpenter refused. He understood that the entire film built toward that ambiguous ending. The paranoia, the uncertainty, the complete breakdown of trust. It all demanded an ending with no easy answers. To change it would betray everything the film represented. The studio threatened. Carpenter held firm. Eventually, they relented, and the ambiguous ending remained. Today, it's considered one of the greatest endings in horror cinema. The debate about who's infected continues 40 years later. That ending made the film timeless. But it also confirmed in the studio's eyes that Carpenter was difficult, that he wouldn't compromise. That label would haunt him for years. And the on-set atmosphere was sometimes as dark as the material. Number 16. The cast's alcohol was real. Throughout the film, characters cope with stress by drinking a lot. And in many of those scenes, the actors were drinking real scotch, bourbon, and beer. This was relatively common in 80s filmmaking, but increasingly rare today. The logic was that real alcohol made the exhaustion and emotional numbness more authentic. When you see characters' faces flushed and movements slightly loose, sometimes that wasn't just acting. Kurt Russell in particular drank real whiskey in several scenes. Not enough to get drunk, but enough to take the edge off and add genuine weariness to his performance. The final scene with Childs? That bottle they pass back and forth? Actual alcohol. Modern productions would never allow this for safety and legal reasons. But in 1982, directors still operated under the old-school Hollywood philosophy that whatever gets the performance is acceptable. And the performances in The Thing have an authentic weariness that's hard to fake completely sober. Number 17. Some crew members vomited during the creature FX tests. Before filming, Rob Bottin tested the creature animatronics for Carpenter and the producers. These were the first times anyone saw the full transformations in motion. The spider head crawling away, the Norris thing splitting open, the complete cellular breakdowns. Several crew members left the room during these tests. Some vomited. Others reported feeling physically sick watching the monitors. These were seasoned film professionals who'd worked on horror and action films before, and even they couldn't stomach what Bottin had created. Carpenter's reaction? Excitement. If the crew was this disturbed, audiences would be devastated. He knew he had something special precisely because it provoked such visceral reactions. The studio's reaction? Horror, not the good kind. They worried the film would be rated X. They worried audiences would walk out. They were right to worry, but for the wrong reasons. Audiences didn't walk out because it was too gross. They walked out because it was too bleak at exactly the wrong cultural moment. And not all of Bottin's work made the final cut. Number 18. A stop-motion version of the final monster was filmed. For the Blair Thing, the final massive creature at the end, Bottin initially planned a stop-motion animation sequence. Legendary animator Randall William Cook created a detailed puppet and filmed an elaborate sequence of the creature moving. Carpenter reviewed the footage and cut it. It looked too artificial compared to the practical animatronics throughout the rest of the film. The stop motion, no matter how well executed, had that slightly jerky, obviously animated quality that would have broken the visceral realism. So the final monster became a largely practical effect with minimal movement, supplemented by quick cuts and chaotic editing. It's less dynamic than originally planned, but more consistent with the film's practical horror aesthetic. This was a painful decision. Cook had worked for weeks on the animation. The sequence was technically impressive, but Carpenter prioritized tonal consistency over spectacle, another choice that hurt feelings in the moment but served the film's lasting legacy. Number 19. The film was initially hated. When The Thing premiered in June 1982, critics destroyed it. Not just negative reviews, genuine contempt. The Washington Post called it the quintessential moron movie of the 80s. The New York Times described it as too phony to be disgusting. Even genre critics were harsh. Many accused Carpenter of making something gratuitously gross with no substance. The body horror was seen as exploitative. The bleak ending was seen as nihilistic and irresponsible. The film was nominated for multiple Razzie Awards. Carpenter was devastated. He'd poured everything into this film. The practical effects were revolutionary. The atmosphere was suffocating. The performances were intense. And critics were calling it trash. But here's what changed. Home video. Throughout the late 80s and 90s, The Thing found new audiences on VHS and cable television. People who'd missed it in theaters discovered it at home. Film students studied it. Horror fans evangelized it. By the 2000s, critical opinion had completely reversed. The Thing appeared on greatest horror films lists. The practical effects were recognized as masterpieces. The ambiguous ending was celebrated as sophisticated. The film Carpenter thought had destroyed his career became his masterpiece. But in 1982, he didn't know any of that was coming. He just knew he'd failed. Number 20. Carpenter didn't direct a film for years after this. The Thing's box office failure and critical reception genuinely broke John Carpenter's confidence. He'd been a rising director. Halloween was a phenomenon. Escape from New York was a hit. Then The Thing crashed and burned. Studios stopped offering him big projects. His reputation as difficult and uncommercial spread through Hollywood. For several years, he struggled to get financing for new films. When he did work, it was on smaller projects with limited budgets. Carpenter later admitted he went into depression after The Thing's failure. He questioned whether he understood audiences at all. He wondered if he'd become too dark, too uncommercializing, too obsessed with practical effects over commercial appeal. It took years for him to recover professionally and emotionally. When he did return to form with films like Big Trouble in Little China and They Live, they were also initially underappreciated. Carpenter became known as the director whose best films flopped but became cult classics years later. The irony is devastating. The Thing is now considered one of the greatest horror and science fiction films ever made. It's studied in film schools. It influenced generations of filmmakers. The practical effects are still reference points for modern creature design. But in 1982, it nearly ended the career of the man who made it. The Thing failed because it was ahead of its time. Too dark, too practical, too uncompromising for Reagan-era audiences. But those same qualities made it immortal. If you love these facts, hit subscribe for more retro film deep dives, and check out our video on Aliens Practical Effects Nightmare. Thanks for watching.